Top of the hour, you are live in the CNN newsroom. Thank you for staying with me this holiday weekend. I'm Ana Cabrera in New York. We have so much to talk about. We now know that the partial government shutdown will last through Christmas. Check the clock right there on your screen. It has been 16 hours now. Hundreds of thousands of vital government workers on the job right now, but without being paid. Thousands more being told to stay home. They're on furlough with no pay 3 days before Christmas. This is why President Trump wants $5 billion to build a border wall. A bill to approve that money had no chance to pass the Senate, so the president refused to approve other money to keep the government fully running past midnight. Senate Democrats blame the president. The president blames Democrats in Congress. And while everybody is blaming everybody else, the people who work for 9 cabinet departments are either sent home or on the job with no guarantee they will get paid. More about who in the government is working this weekend, including who is working without pay. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of people here. I'll have that in a moment, including how it may impact your Christmas weekend plans. But first, let's go to the White House, and CNN's Sarah Westwood also with us as CNN's Phil Mattingly staying on Capitol Hill right now. Phil, I'll start with you. The Senate was in session earlier. They are now adjourned. We are told there is no chance this shutdown will end before Christmas. How do we know that?
Yeah, Anna, look, if you want to know what's happening behind the scenes, it's at an impasse. That's what I've been told from people that are involved. Senator Richard Shelby, the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, a key person in these talks, said earlier when he came back from a meeting from the White House that a deal at this point was not imminent. Both sides very dug in on their bottom line. President Trump, $5 billion to fund a border wall. Democrats making clear they will not give a dime towards that. And until that gap is bridged, obviously there's no clear end game in town. But if you want to read tea leaves as well, just a short while ago, the United States Senate adjourned. They will not be back in full session, at least under the current schedule, until at least the Thursday after Christmas. So almost a week from now at this point. Senators I've talked to, those that were actually here today, and there weren't a lot of them, are heading home for the holidays. They plan on spending Christmas with their families. I'm told the House will soon also tell their members something similar. Go home for Christmas, come back when this is over. Now, all of this with the caveat, and this is something Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told reporters after he adjourned the Senate, that if something comes together, if a deal certainly happens, they would be willing to come back and pass it. But at this point, given the state of the negotiations and given the fact that everybody's flying home for the holidays, there is no expectation of a deal anytime soon. After Christmas, looks like right now it would be the earliest, if even then, Anna.
Let me go to Sarah Westwood. Phil, stand by. Sarah, what are you hearing there from the White House? Any possible whisper of a compromise?
Well, Anna, President Trump is still not signaling what he'd be willing to consider in terms of a compromise or a deal that could get at least 10 Senate Democrats on board and reopen the 25% of government that's closed. Now, White House officials say that the president is not budging from his demand for $5 billion in funding for his border wall. And they say that money must go to the construction of a wall or some other kind of steel barrier along the border. That money can't be used for general border security, which is one of several ideas that have been floating around Capitol Hill as a potential compromise. The president not open to that at the moment, but make no mistake, he really has been all over the map when it comes to this shutdown, shifting from just last week saying that he'd be proud to take responsibility for a shutdown if it was over the border wall, to his aides signaling that he might actually be willing to sign a temporary spending bill that would have kept the government open until February 8th, and then signaling on Thursday that actually he was going to reject that compromise, a bipartisan compromise that passed the Senate, and hold firm on his $5 billion number. Shutting the government down. Sources say that the president had become increasingly sensitive to criticism from his conservative allies, that he was essentially surrendering on his demand for a border wall by signing that continuing resolution that would have averted this shutdown. Now, the president obviously holding firm to that number, but not offering clarity on what else he might consider in terms of coming down from $5 billion in terms of trades for other immigration priorities. That lack of clarity has caused a lot of headaches on Capitol Hill for negotiators trying to figure out what exactly he might put his signature on, because, Anna, there's just no point in lawmakers lining up behind a compromise that wouldn't garner the president's signature.
That's what they say, although I wonder if they would test it out. Sarah Westwood, Phil Mattingly, appreciate both your reporting. Thank you. What exactly are we talking about when we say the government is even partially shut down? It's the Christmas weekend, so a lot of government offices and functions are taking time off for the holiday anyway, right? But what is still working and who is still working? Not every government office will hang up a closed sign, but a very, very large number of people are impacted. Not just federal employees, but everybody in the country who depends on what they do. Here's just a brief skim of the numbers. Until the government reopens, more than 400,000 government workers are being told they will work without a paycheck. And that includes more than 41,000 federal police officers and correctional officers, and roughly 42,000 employees of the U.S. Coast Guard. No paycheck. A furlough is a different story, and that applies to about 380,000 people placed on furlough. That means they stay home without being paid, essentially a leave of absence while their work is not being done. And here's who that applies to. Most NASA workers, most national park rangers and park safety officials, most of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Remember, we have a space station in orbit. An American astronaut is on board. NASA says they will have staff watching the space station, satellites, the mission on Mars, and America's other space interests. But now, that's a lot of numbers. What will that look like to you after Christmas Day if the government is not back in business? First, the post office will be open. Air and rail travel will still function as normal. Social Security offices will still work. That includes timely delivery of benefit checks. What about national parks? Well, yes and no. Some parks will leave the gates open, but with a skeleton staff on duty just in case of emergencies. Any buildings will probably be locked, closed for the duration of the shutdown. Small business loan offices, federal housing agencies also closed. U.S. courts scheduled to handle civil cases? Nope, not open. And field offices that help farmers closed as well. Interesting to note here that one official U.S. government function that will not stop working, even in this government shutdown, the Robert Mueller special counsel investigation of Russian collusion and President Trump's election. And that team is funded and exempt from the shutdown. It's business as usual for them without interruption.